The dusty floorboards of the old barn didn't just creak under Ezra's boots, they groaned, like they were trying to warn him. At 14, Ezra Whitmore thought he knew every secret the family farm held. He knew which beam the barn owls nested in, where the floor was soft from rot, and which stall door always stuck in the winter. But he didn't know about the satchel. Sunlight cut through the broken slats in the wall, painting stripes across the hay-strewn floor. And in one of those stripes of light, almost like it was on a stage, was a dark shape. It was a leather satchel, old and cracked, wedged deep between two heavy beams in the far wall. It wasn't just lost, it was hidden. His heart started a low, nervous drumbeat. This was his grandfather's barn, untouched for 20 years. No one ever came out this far. With a grunt, he pried at the beams, splinters digging into his fingers. The satchel came free with a dusty sigh. Inside, the world tilted on its side. There were property deeds, the paper so old it felt like skin. But the names on them were wrong. Names he'd never seen were scratched out. And other names, names he knew, names of his neighbors, were written over them in a different, sharper ink. There were maps, too, with land boundaries that made no sense. They showed the Morrisons' farm as twice its size, and the old widow Hattie's plot as belonging to the town sheriff. And then he saw the list. It was a list of families. His own family, the Whitmores, were at the top. Next to each name was a number, a dollar amount. It was a ledger of theft. But the worst part, the part that made the air in his lungs turn to ice, was a single folded letter on top. The ink was fresh, no more than a few months old. It read, "The boy's been asking too many questions about the old settlement. We may need to handle this permanently." Ezra's blood went cold. He'd never asked questions about any settlement. He didn't even know what it was. This letter wasn't about him. It couldn't be. Then behind him, the heavy barn door didn't creak shut. It slammed. The bang echoed like a gunshot in the sudden darkness. There was no wind, not a breath of it. And then he heard them. Footsteps on the dirt path outside. Slow, heavy, deliberate. They were coming closer. Someone had watched him. Someone knew he was here. And they were coming to make sure the secret stayed buried. Ezra's hands shook as he shoved the papers back into the bag, his mind screaming. The footsteps stopped right outside. A long, dark shadow fell across the gap under the door. He flattened himself against the far wall, clutching the satchel to his chest like a shield. His breath caught in his throat. "I know you're in there, boy." The voice was like gravel grinding together, deep, unfamiliar, and filled with a chilling patience. "Found something that don't belong to you, did you?" How could he know? How could this stranger possibly know what was in the bag? Had he been in the barn the whole time, hidden in the shadows of the loft? "Come on out now," the voice continued, dripping with a false, syrupy friendliness. "We can talk about this like civilized folk. You stay hidden, things just get complicated." Through a crack in the old wood, Ezra saw him, a tall man in a dark coat, his face hidden by the wide brim of a hat. But Ezra could see his hands. One of them rested on the handle of a pistol at his hip. The sun glinted off the polished metal. This wasn't a conversation. It was a threat. The documents, the names, his own family listed there. This wasn't just about stolen land. The letter proved it. It was about something people would kill to protect. The handle on the barn door began to turn, a slow, agonizing screech of rusted metal. Ezra held his breath, praying to a god he wasn't sure was listening. The door creaked open, and a pair of dusty boots stepped inside, followed by the long shadow of the man who owned them. The man moved with the lazy confidence of a wolf circling its prey. He didn't even look for Ezra, not at first. He just stood there, letting the silence stretch until it was a physical weight in the barn. "Smart boy, staying quiet," the stranger's voice echoed off the rafters. "Your daddy raised you right." The mention of his father, dead 5 years now, sent a jolt of pure ice through Ezra's veins. This man knew his family. This wasn't random. "See, the thing about secrets," the man said, his boots scraping on the floorboards as he took a slow walk deeper into the barn, "is they got a way of eating a man alive, from the inside out." He paused, looking around. "Your granddaddy learned that lesson the hard way." Granddaddy? Jacob Whitmore had died before Ezra could even walk. His mother only ever said he was a good man, an honest farmer who worked himself into an early grave. Course, your mama probably painted a real pretty picture of him, the man chuckled, a sound with no humor in it. Told you he built this place with his bare hands and honest sweat. He stopped walking. He was looking directly at the spot between the beams where the satchel had been hidden. He knew. He knew exactly where it was. Ezra's heart hammered against his ribs so hard he was sure the man could hear it. The truth he was realizing was a whole lot uglier than family stories. You see, your granddaddy and me, we had a business arrangement, the man said, turning his head slowly, his eyes scanning the deep shadows where Ezra was pressed against the wall. He was supposed to keep some papers safe for me. Real safe. Make sure they never saw the light of day. He took a step closer. But then he got a conscience. Started talking about doing right by folks. A conscience is a dangerous thing for a man in our line of work, boy. The picture was forming in Ezra's mind, each piece more terrifying than the last. His grandfather wasn't just a farmer. He was a criminal. He was part of something that needed secrets buried deep. Problem is, the man continued, his voice dropping, getting colder. When your granddaddy passed, them papers disappeared with him. I've spent 20 years looking for 'em. He turned his whole body now, facing Ezra's hiding spot. Then today, I see a young Whitmore boy poking around this old barn. Seemed like my luck was about to change. Ezra felt like he couldn't breathe. This man hadn't just stumbled upon him. He'd been watching, waiting. For 20 years, he'd been waiting for one of Jacob Whitmore's family to lead him right to this spot. So here's how this is gonna go, the man said, taking another deliberate step. You're gonna hand over that satchel, and we're all gonna pretend this little chat never happened. But Ezra knew better. He saw it in the man's posture, heard it in the cold edge of his voice. He'd seen the letter. He knew too much. Handing over the papers was never going to be enough. Not anymore. The man's boots were only a few feet away now. His hiding spot was about to be useless. His mind raced, searching for an escape that wasn't there. And just as the man's hand reached out to pull him from the shadows, a new voice cut through the tense air. Malachi Brooks, you get away from my son. It was his mother. Ezra's blood turned to ice. She was standing in the open doorway of the barn, her small frame silhouetted against the bright afternoon sun. But the voice that came out of her was one Ezra had never heard before. It wasn't the voice of his gentle, quiet mother. It was hard as iron. The man, Malachi, slowly turned. A cruel smile spread across his face, visible for the first time from under his hat. Well now, if it ain't little Cora, come to collect your boy, have you? You leave him be, she repeated, stepping into the barn. Whatever business you had with my father, it died with him. Your father made promises, Cora. Promises he broke. Malachi's voice turned venomous. Cost me 20 years of my life, searching for what he stole from me. That ain't a debt that just dies. He didn't steal a thing, she shot back, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. He tried to make right what you forced him into. Ezra pressed himself tighter into the shadows, his eyes wide. His mother knew. She knew about all of this. She stood between him and Malachi, blocking the only exit, a lioness protecting her cub. Your daddy helped me forge land deeds, girl, Malachi spat. Helped me take this territory from fools who trusted him. He was good at it too, had a real artist's hand with a pen. Then he got soft, grew a conscience and hid the evidence like a squirrel hiding nuts for the winter. He laughed, a bitter, ugly sound. Thought he could save his soul by bearing the truth. The satchel in Ezra's hands felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. His grandfather hadn't just hidden some documents. He'd helped steal land from his own neighbors. He was a forger, a thief, and his family was living on the profits. So you've been waiting all these years, his mother said, her voice shaking with rage, watching us, circling our family like a vulture. Had to be patient, Malachi said with a shrug. Couldn't just tear the place apart, but I knew. I knew one day one of Jacob's kin would get curious, stumble right across his little treasure chest. His eyes flicked past Cora, straight to the shadows where Ezra was hiding. And the boy found it, didn't he? I can see it on your face, Cora. He found it. His mother's silence was all the answer he needed. All right, Here's what happens now, Malachi said, his voice dropping to a low, menacing whisper. The boy comes out. He hands over them papers. And your family gets to keep living on this nice little farm. Land that rightfully belongs to the Morrison family. Everyone stays quiet. Everyone keeps breathing. The Morrison family. Ezra's mind flashed to their faces. They'd left town 3 years ago, defeated. Said they'd lost the farm to debt, but it was a lie. Their land, their home, had been stolen by his grandfather. And if we don't? His mother asked, her voice barely a whisper. Malachi's smile returned, colder than a winter grave. Then folks in this town are going to learn some real uncomfortable truths about the sainted Jacob Whitmore. And you know, accidents have a way of happening to folks who know too much. The threat hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Ezra's family, their home, their very lives were all built on a foundation of lies. And now the lies were about to swallow them whole. You got 1 minute to produce that boy, Cora, Malachi hissed, or I start making things real unpleasant. His mother took another step into the barn, her eyes desperately searching the shadows. Ezra, honey, she called out, her voice cracking. I know you're here. Come on out. Slow and easy now. Ezra's mind was a whirlwind. Give up the papers, and the Morrisons, and who knew how many other families would never get justice. Keep them, and Malachi would destroy his family. He was trapped. There was no right answer. 30 seconds, boy. Malachi's voice sliced through the silence. Ezra made his choice. He took a deep breath and stepped out from behind the heavy wooden beam. The leather satchel was clutched in his hand. But he didn't walk towards Malachi. He walked to his mother's side. There's a good lad, Malachi said, extending a hand. Now let's have them papers and we can all go about our business. No. The word was quiet, but it echoed in the barn. Malachi's face darkened. Come again? I said no, Ezra repeated, his voice gaining strength as he looked the man in the eye. These papers prove what you did. You stole land from good people, people who trusted my grandfather before you turned him. Your grandfather was rotten long before I met him, boy, Malachi sneered. I just gave him a way to profit from it. That's a lie, Cora cried, her voice breaking. My father was a good man who made one terrible mistake. He spent the last years of his life trying to figure out how to make it right. By hiding the evidence? Malachi took a menacing step closer. By letting innocent families lose their homes while you all lived comfortable on their land? Real righteous of him. Ezra looked at his mother, at the years of pain and guilt etched on her face. She had known. She had carried this secret, this shame, for 20 years. The Morrison family, Ezra said, his voice quiet but clear. They didn't lose their farm to debt. You forced them out. Boy's smarter than he looks, Malachi said, his eyes narrowing. His hand drifted down, resting on the butt of his pistol. Too smart for his own good. There are 5 other families on this list, Ezra pressed on, feeling a strange surge of courage. All of them cheated. All of them deserve to know the truth. Truth's a luxury, son, Malachi said softly, and most folks can't afford it, especially when it costs them everything they've got. He took another step, closing the distance between them. So, what's it gonna be? You hand over them papers and let sleeping dogs lie? Or am I gonna have to take them off your dead body? The threat was out in the open now, raw and undeniable. This man would kill them both without a second thought to keep his secrets buried. Ezra looked from Malachi's cold, dead eyes to the worn leather satchel in his hands. He felt his mother's hand on his shoulder, trembling. They were out of time. They were out of options. But as his eyes scanned the documents one last time, he saw something. Something he hadn't noticed before. A detail so small, so insignificant, that it changed everything. The realization struck Ezra like a physical blow. These weren't the only papers. His grandfather, the man Malachi painted as a simple fool who grew a conscience, had been much smarter than that. The letter. The one that made his blood run cold. The boy's been asking too many questions about the old settlement. The old settlement. There were 3 abandoned settlements in the county. Why be so vague? And the date on the letter was recent, but the ink was slightly different from the signature. It wasn't a warning about him. It was a clue, left for him. "You're looking for the wrong papers," Ezra said, his voice steady despite the frantic beating of his heart. Malachi froze, his eyes narrowing to slits. "What did you say to me, boy?" "These," Ezra said, holding up the satchel. "These are copies. My grandfather made copies of everything. He hid them in separate places." The lie came easily, tasting like truth on his tongue. He was gambling, betting his life on a hunch. He was protecting himself from you. "The boy's lying," Malachi growled, but a flicker of doubt crossed his face. 20 years he'd been searching, 20 years of frustration. The idea that Jacob Whitmore had outsmarted him even from the grave was a poison he couldn't ignore. The original land deeds, the ones with the real forged signatures, are hidden somewhere else. Ezra pushed, the story building in his mind. These copies prove the fraud, sure. But the originals, those are the only things that can truly bury the evidence. Without both sets, Ezra looked Malachi dead in the eye. "You'll always be looking over your shoulder." His mother's hand squeezed his shoulder. She understood. He was buying them time, making them too valuable to kill. "Where are they?" Malachi demanded, his voice a low growl. "I don't know," Ezra said truthfully, "but I can find them. My grandfather left clues inside these documents, codes, references to places only our family would know. Give me time to figure it out, and I can lead you right to them." "You think I'm a fool?" Malachi spat. "You think I'm gonna let you walk out of here with those papers? You think you can find what he hid without my help?" Ezra shot back, his voice ringing with a confidence he didn't feel. "You've been looking for 20 years and found nothing. The only reason you're here now is because I led you to them." Rage contorted Malachi's face, but the boy's logic was a steel trap. He was right. He needed the boy. For now. "Besides," Ezra added, pressing his advantage, "if anything happens to me or my mother, this whole town will know you were the last ones to see us. And I don't think Sheriff Morrison can ignore 2 murders, no matter how much you're paying him." Cora gasped. "Sheriff Morrison?" "Oh yes, Mama," Ezra said, not taking his eyes off Malachi. "His family's on the list too. That big ranch of his, it came from the same pot as our farm." He watched his mother's face crumble as another pillar of their small community was revealed to be rotten to the core. Malachi stared at Ezra, a look of grudging respect in his cold eyes. "You're a smart kid. Too smart." He was quiet for a long moment, the wheels turning in his head. Finally, he nodded slowly. "All right, here's the deal. You got 3 days. 3 days to find them originals. You and your mama go about your business. You talk to no one. You go to no law. You don't even breathe a word of this to the town preacher." He stepped back, a cruel smile twisting his lips. "You find them. We make a trade. The original documents for your family's safety. I disappear from your lives for good. And the other families? The Morrisons? What about them?" Malachi's smile answered the unspoken question. "Sometimes, boy, justice is a luxury folks can't afford." He turned and walked towards the barn door, then stopped. "Oh, and son," he said without looking back, "don't even think about running. I've got eyes and ears all over this territory. You can't take a piss without me knowing about it." As Malachi's shadow disappeared from the doorway, Ezra and his mother were left alone in the dusty silence. Their nightmare, Ezra realized, was only just beginning. The walk back to the farmhouse was a silent, suffocating march. The familiar dirt path, the friendly wave from a neighbor, the smell of baking bread from the general store. It was all a lie. A thin, fragile veneer over a pit of corruption that ran so deep it had poisoned the very ground they walked on. When they finally reached their front porch, Ezra's voice was barely a whisper. "Mama, did you know about Granddaddy?" His mother's hands shook as she fumbled with the key to the front door. "I suspected," she said, her voice choked with tears that had been held back for 2 decades. "We got this land too easy, too cheap. Your granddaddy. He would disappear for days at a time. He'd come back with money, his eyes haunted, but he'd never say where he'd been." "Why didn't you say anything?" Ezra asked, the accusation sharp in his own ears. What was I supposed to say? She cried, finally pushing the door open and stumbling inside. That I thought my own father was a common criminal? That our home, everything we had, was built on someone else's sorrow? The tears finally came, streaming down her face. I was 17 when he died, Ezra. 17, with a new baby and a farm to run all by myself. I needed to believe he was a good man. I had to. Inside, Ezra spread the copied documents across the worn kitchen table. In the familiar light of their home, the crime seemed even starker. Names crossed out, signatures that looked too similar, dates that didn't match official records. It was a spiderweb of deceit. Look at this, Ezra said, his finger tracing a line on one of the deeds. This shows the Morrison land being sold to Sheriff Morrison's father. But this one, he pulled out another paper, shows the same land being granted to the Morrisons by the territory just 6 months earlier. He created 2 sets of books, Cora whispered, horrified. One for the town and one for the truth. He made it look like the Morrisons sold their land willingly. And the sheriff knew, Ezra finished. The whole time he knew. That's why he never looked too hard when families started losing their farms. He leaned closer to the papers, his mind racing. The bluff had worked, but now he had to make it real. He had to find something. He had to find the clues his grandfather had supposedly left. He scanned the pages, looking for anything out of the ordinary. And then he saw it. In the margins of several documents were tiny, almost invisible markings. Not random smudges, deliberate pinpricks. They formed patterns, constellations. Mama, look, he breathed. He recognized them from the old astronomy book his grandfather had given his father. Cygnus, Ursa Minor, Lyra. They were star charts. But when he connected the dots, they didn't form stars. They formed a map. The old church, Cora breathed, her eyes wide. These are directions, from our farm to the old abandoned church down by the creek. Your granddaddy used to go there when he was troubled. He'd sit in the pews for hours. That's where he hid them, the real papers. But son, she grabbed his arm, her eyes filled with a new fear. If you find those papers and give them to Malachi, the Morrisons will never get their home back. All those families, they'll be cheated forever. Ezra looked at his mother at the moral crossroads that stood before them. Save themselves by letting the crime stand, or risk everything for a justice that was 20 years overdue. There might be another way, Ezra said slowly, an idea taking root. What if we get the originals? But Malachi isn't the first person to see them. What are you thinking? The territorial capital, the federal marshals. If we can get the real proof to them, Malachi can't silence everyone. That's a full day's ride, Ezra. He'll know we're gone before we've cleared the county line. He said he has eyes everywhere. Then we have to be smarter than his eyes, Ezra said, his gaze firm. Tonight. I'll go to the church tonight, and we leave before the sun comes up. As they huddled over the table, making their desperate plan, neither of them saw the face in their kitchen window. A face they knew, a face they trusted, a face that quickly melted back into the shadows to report what it had heard. That night, under the sliver of a moon, Ezra slipped out of the house. The abandoned church was a skeleton against the star-filled sky, its steeple a bony finger pointing towards heaven. The front door groaned open on rusted hinges, and inside moonlight painted the rotting pews and crumbling altar in shades of silver and black. He pulled out a small candle, the flame flickering, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Following the star map from his grandfather's papers, he moved through the silent church. North from the door, past the baptismal font, southeast to the third pew from the back, then west towards the wall. Just behind the altar, exactly where the map indicated, a single floorboard felt loose under his boot. He pried it up with his knife, his heart pounding. And there it was, a metal box wrapped in oilcloth to protect it from the damp. His hands trembled as he lifted the lid. Inside, perfectly preserved, were the original documents. Every forged deed, every fraudulent transfer, every signature his grandfather had been forced to create. But there was something else, tucked at the very bottom. It was a letter, thick with pages, addressed only to whoever finds this. It was a full confession. In his grandfather's elegant script, Jacob Whitmore laid it all bare. How Malachi had threatened to harm his wife and baby daughter, Ezra's mother, unless he complied. How the guilt had eaten him alive. How he had created this intricate system of copies and clues, hoping that one day, someone with more courage than he possessed would uncover the truth. I pray whoever reads this can right my wrongs, the letter concluded. These people deserve justice. They deserve their homes back. Do what I was too afraid to do. Tears streamed down Ezra's face as he read the words of the grandfather he'd never known. He wasn't a simple criminal. He was a man trapped who had spent his life creating a weapon for someone else to wield. Ezra tucked the box under his arm and ran. He had to get home. They had to leave now. As he neared the main road, the sound of voices carried on the night wind. He dropped into a ditch, peering over the edge. 3 men on horseback rode slowly past, their faces illuminated by a lantern. It was Malachi and 2 others. They were patrolling the roads. "The boy's got to make his move soon," Malachi was saying. "Can't let this drag on. The longer we wait, the more chance someone gets nervous and talks." "What if he don't find nothing?" one of the other men asked. Malachi's laugh was a cold, dead thing. "Then we make sure he and his ma don't never talk about what he already found. Either way, this ends in the next 2 days." Ezra's blood ran colder than the night air. Malachi never intended to let them live. Finding the originals, not finding them, it didn't matter. They were loose ends. Their fate was sealed. He waited until the riders were gone, then ran the rest of the way home, his grandfather's confession feeling like a burning coal against his chest. His mother was waiting, her face a pale mask of worry in the lamplight. "I found them," he whispered, placing the metal box on the table. A wave of relief washed over her face. "Thank God. Now we can give him what he wants. We can end this." "No, Mama," Ezra said, his voice grim. "I heard him. He's going to kill us no matter what. He can't afford witnesses." Cora's face crumpled. "Then what do we do?" Ezra looked at the metal box, at the confession of a terrified man who had prayed for a hero. "We do what Granddaddy couldn't," he said. "We make this right. Tomorrow morning before sunrise, we ride for the Capitol. We ride for the marshals." "He'll be watching for us," she whispered. "I know," Ezra said, meeting her eyes. "And Mama, we might not make it." Outside their window, a shadow detached itself from the darkness of the woodshed, mounted a horse, and rode silently toward town. Malachi's eyes were everywhere, and they had just seen everything. Before the first hint of dawn painted the sky, they were on their horses. The metal box containing the originals was sealed in an oilcloth sack and hidden deep within Ezra's saddlebags. They'd left the copies under a loose floorboard in the kitchen. It was their only insurance. They rode east, away from the main road to the Capitol, hoping to use the winding cattle trails to avoid Malachi's patrols. They'd barely gone 5 miles when they saw it, a plume of dust on the horizon behind them, then another, and another. They weren't just being followed, they were being hunted. "They're coming, Mama!" Ezra yelled over the pounding of their horses' hooves. "Ride!" Their farm horses were sturdy, but they were no match for the fresh mounts Malachi and his men were riding. The dust clouds grew closer, the sound of hoofbeats a constant, terrifying thunder behind them. By mid-morning, the first gunshot cracked through the air. It wasn't aimed at them. It was a warning, a promise of what was to come. They were being herded. "There!" Cora pointed ahead, her voice strained. A cluster of rough buildings shimmered in the heat. "Harper's trading post. If we can get to other people." Another shot, this one closer, kicking up dirt just behind his horse's hooves. They pushed their tired animals into a desperate final gallop, thundering into the trading post yard and scattering chickens and merchants in their wake. "Federal Marshal!" Ezra screamed as he half fell, half leapt from his saddle. "I need to see the Federal Marshal!" A few men laughed, others just stared at the wild-eyed boy. But then an older man with a weary face and a silver badge pinned to his vest stepped forward from the crowd. "I'm Deputy Marshal Crawford. What's all the fuss, son?" "Land fraud," Ezra gasped, pulling the metal box from his saddlebags. "Murder! I have evidence that proves nothing but the boy's wild imagination." Ezra spun around. Malachi was there, dismounting from his horse as calmly as if he were arriving for Sunday service. His men fanned out behind him, their hands resting on their guns. "Apologies for the disturbance, Marshal," Malachi said, his voice smooth as silk. "The boy's had a rough time of it since his father passed. Gets confused. He makes up these stories." "It's a lie," Ezra yelled, thrusting the box at the deputy. "These documents prove he's been stealing land for 20 years. Marshal Crawford took the box, his expression unreadable. He opened it and began to read. The crowd was silent, watching. As the marshal read Jacob Whitmore's confession, his face grew grim. He looked from the papers to Malachi, then back again. "These are some mighty serious accusations," he said slowly. "They're the ravings of a dead man who drank himself to death," Malachi replied smoothly. "Jacob Whitmore was a known gambler. Probably forged them papers himself to cover his debts. Then you won't mind if I ride these over to the Territorial Land Office to verify them," Marshal Crawford said, his eyes never leaving Malachi's. "Just to clear all this up." For the first time, Malachi's composure cracked. A flicker of panic flashed in his eyes. His hand twitched towards his pistol, but he stopped. There were too many witnesses. A dozen men were now watching. Their interest piqued. "Of course not, Marshal," he said, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. "Investigate all you want. Just don't expect to find anything but the fantasies of a disturbed boy and his hysterical mother." But it was too late. The evidence was in the law's hands. The secret was out. Within 3 months, the whole territory knew the truth. The federal investigation uncovered a web of fraud and corruption that stunned everyone. Malachi Brooks vanished, becoming a wanted fugitive, but not before his entire network was dismantled. Sheriff Morrison was arrested, stripped of his badge, and sent to a federal prison. 7 families, including the Morrisons, had their land restored. The Whitmore farm, built on a foundation of crime, was forfeited to the government. Ezra and his mother lost their home, but as they stood on the porch of the Morrisons' farm, helping them move their belongings back in, Ezra felt a sense of peace he'd never known. Old Man Morrison clasped Ezra's hand, his eyes shining with tears. "Your grandfather made a terrible mistake, son. But you made it right. That takes a kind of courage most men never find." Ezra looked out over the rolling hills. The land finally returned to its rightful owners. He'd learned that the truth can cost you everything you have, but sometimes it gives you back something you didn't even know you'd lost. If you enjoyed this story of justice on the frontier, don't forget to like and subscribe for more unforgettable tales. Click the video on your screen right now for another story you won't want to miss. Your support helps us keep these stories alive, so consider leaving a comment and letting us know what you think.